welcome Sydney Adams to Inside Check.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Very excited to be here to learn about your work as a game designer on Dungeons and Dragons, and to learn a little bit about you. So let me just start where I rolled an 8.
Okay.
So maybe with
mystery.
My wisdom modifier is not
Maybe
that
I
good.
can
So that's
help
probably
you
like a
with
9
that.
total. Tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, yes, I am Sydney Adams, and I am a game designer on the Dungeons and Dragons team. I recently helped contribute to FizzBand's Treasury of Dragons, and I'm going to be working on some exciting stuff that will be shown soon. So, looking forward to that coming out when it does. That being whatever it is. The mystery. You only got an 8, so I can't tell you that much.
Damn it,
right?
Greg. We could have found out.
I know, right? She went right in on the stuff she can't talk about.
Yeah, but I was previously a designer on Magic the Gathering, and I'm best known for my work on Black is Magic, The Secret Lair. That was the philanthropic drop for Black Girls Code.
Which I wanted to talk a little bit about that, just because I know we're talking about D&D here, but that was such an impactful, amazing project that you were the creative lead for, correct?
Yes.
And there's also a really cool connection between you and Black Girls Code that I recently learned.
Yeah. Back when I was in grad school, I used to volunteer as just like a technical support person, like running like Lego robotics and like little workshops, with like teenagers who were way cooler than I was. And, it was really a wonderful experience just to even have that experience of just seeing a bunch of little Black girls running around, all caring about STEM fields, which are, traditionally fields where we are not pushed to go.
Right.
So like from that experience, I continued to keep a relationship with the chapter when I moved here to Washington. And, it was really great to have that moment where I could give back and really sort of see. I feel like they sort of quietly saw me grow, right? Like from like a tiny backpack wearing, very overburdened grad student running on Eggo waffles and spunk, to like this person who now can give back in a meaningful way, and that means a lot to me. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I'm sure it meant a lot to them as well, to see you as that role model and someone who looks like them and a career path that they are interested in following as well. So
yeah, it's crazy how much you just need permission. Like it's not even necessarily like just having the means to do it. Like that's an entire different conversation when it comes to resourcing. But having somebody say like, yeah, you can do that. Even just having that idea in your head, like it's very powerful.
It's something that all, I think, fantasy fans latch onto too, right? I mean, it's that idea of being able to do great things, to topple, tyrannical governments, to get the treasure, right? And I feel like you, contributed to that. Were you a fan of
in real life?
Yeah, were you a fan of fantasy growing up?
Oh, big, huge, like. Dungeons and Dragons I actually knew about longer before I actually discovered Magic. Like I've been role playing for the longest. I've played a lot of the discontinued D&D, like our MMORPGs that were like, gonna get off the ground. I may have maxed out my Neverwinter character. I may have too many books of maybe every book in D&D and the alt cover. And I may have also taught myself to be DM so I could force my family to play with me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was the one thing that was, a nice tie-in during the pandemic was, I live away from my family. We're all in scattered different places. But during the sort of heat of it on Sundays, we would, I basically said, like, look, I will DM, I will make your character sheets, and those character sheets will just be you. All you have to do is play yourself. Don't worry about the fantasy, because I wanted to sort of remove the barrier until they were more comfortable. So I was like, all right, your name is Jocelyn, and your yourself, but you may or may not have a sword, right? And then I just, yeah. And then I just, me and my group of cousins, and I just kind of hooked them in the story, and they were looking forward to Sundays. And, that was really, really nice that we could play together and imagine, and I even made myself an NPC in the world, because I made it a zombie apocalypse sort of fantasy thing where we all went on vacation and then things went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So like, they had already battled past all these zombies and they'd made it to the city, and they didn't have service. And then their phone finally rings and it's my NPC who's at the Airbnb, and it's like, hey, where is everybody? And why is the power out? So now they have to return to the house to save me. Like the meta, right?
That's super cool. So this was like a modern day D&D, obviously, if we've got Airbnb and cell phones.
Yeah, no, I think that, the one thing that I really love about D&D is that it really is it's a set of tools for the imagination, in the same way that it requires imagination to conceive a career in STEM or game design. It's the same imagination that you can apply to the product. It's the same imagination you can apply to your adventures, and the rules sort of help you so you're not fully making it up the entire thing. You have a guideline, and then you can just embellish. And that was basically a stepping point for then me to do something a bit more serious and a bit more fantasy driven in a more traditional setting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've heard that used, in many ways to try to get people who are maybe uncomfortable with the fantasy or maybe uncomfortable with role playing, just to be like, oh, be yourself. But I'm so glad that it works in this context as well over Zoom.
Oh, yeah. We tried a couple things. It was Zoom, and then it was Google Meets, and then it was Discord. Like you still have to sort of sort it out. But I think, I think it's hard to escape a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. When you put it that way, like, we're meeting up every Sunday and we're telling stories, and that's how it is.
Yeah.
I love it. You got to meet them where they are. So I really like the idea of the modern day D&D. I remember when D20 Modern was a thing. I always really liked that. Like I just, sometimes when I'm just walking the dog, I fancy myself a wizard. And I'm like, what if I could cast a magic missile right now?
I think that like media in the last, I'll make it broad, let's say 10 years, has really democratized fantasy in a lot of ways. Like, I think the average person doesn't think that they might not think, oh, I love fantasy.
Yeah.
But like, we've all seen some version of some sort of magical school. We've all participated in, vampires and mermaids and, ghosts in some sort of way. Like, there's a lot more fantasy in our normal, like, everyday lives than we may not even like consider. Like our mascots on cereal, Count Chocula,
Lucky from Lucky Charms.
Lucky Charms, he's a old leprechaun. So it's like you have fantasy in just the everyday that we don't necessarily like to call out, but then it seems like such a far stretch to be like, well, I'm not going to be a wizard now. Like, no, like it really is just meeting people where they're at, I think.
Yeah.
Tony the Tiger is totally a druid, a wild-shaped druid. Now that I'm thinking
right?
of it. Yeah.
You can't
unsee
that.
Right, he's got that bandana on, right? Like that's
always
that part of him.
Children.
He's actually Fred from Scooby-Doo.
Listen, it's all connected.
Wild-shaped into Tony the Tiger.
That makes total sense.
I'm excited.
Well, now that you are an actual wizard, or have been an actual wizard for many years, what's I mean, I know people, you can't talk about projects you're working on and individuals but what is that? What's that kind of day-to-day thing of being a game designer really like for those who may want to be aspiring game designers out there?
I always tell folks that like it is as fun as you think, and it is as boring as you think, right? Because like, as much as I really do get to enjoy seeing the products come to their final phase and being able to like, sometimes it's digital, sometimes it's paper, and getting to actually experience it, before that comes just a lot of meetings, a lot of Word, and a lot of Excel, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are the tools of the trade when it just comes to, I think especially when you have these analog, tabletop games, like you will be working in a lot more analog things. But typically, I get to enjoy a lot of world building and sort of thought exercises. So when I'm on these teams, I know what I'm doing before I sort of enter. They sort of tell you, oh, you're on this team to contribute game design. You're on this team to write this kind of text. You're on the team to, create art descriptions. So the good thing about, a formalized or a AAA sort of game company experience as opposed to an indie is that you always know what you're doing. But in terms of actually execution, then that's where the fun sort of happens. And it's that balance of, okay, how do I make something really interesting and, that speaks to my experience, that offers the thing that only I can do as a designer, while still having the role of stewardship, right? Which is definitely D&D. It's been around for a very long time, a couple decades. Like by maintaining the tone that's expected, and then also accomplishing the brief, right? Yeah. Like if someone says, "Hey, write 500 words about mermaids," and I show up and I'm like, "I wrote about harpies because it was better." Like that is not, you can't do it, And I think that's what throws a lot of young designers, because they don't expect the constraints. Right. Especially when you're a student, you just have to throw things at the wall and hope something sticks. And that level of freedom and chaos, like it's almost nostalgic now looking back at it, like the days when I would spend an entire night on Unity, like building a maze and being like, yeah, this is going to be the best maze ever. Like just madness, right? Like, and thinking like, how would I have reacted if somebody had told me, love that maze, start over and make it an underwater maze? Like, would I have just flipped the table? Would I have been able to have the resilience of, foresight to be like, oh yeah, no, this is what needs to be done? And I think that being a designer on D&D is, it's definitely fun. Like there's always something different. There's always something new, and you sort of have to stay on your toes to be able to react. Because you never know what's going to come down the pipeline, but you do know that whatever it is, you need to be able to be flexible,
Yeah. What type of design do you gravitate towards? I mean, you got such a varied, history and experience, right? With digital games as well as tabletop games, working on all these things. Like, do you like dungeon design? Do you like monsters? Do you like adventure writing? Do you like none of those things? Like, where does your passion lie?
That's a good question. I think I definitely enjoy adventure writing. Probably is like my number one, just because I love stories, and it's easy for me to be like, it's easy for me to default to stories. It takes an additional level of effort for me to actually make my brain do other things. Not saying I can't. Like my second is monster design, because there's just something very fascinating about the way that the mechanics work. Like I really think it's interesting that a party of 4 one-level characters, should be able to complete the battle within this many rounds. And then if it doesn't work that way, then it's somehow broken. And then you need to start tweaking these numbers, and it's these subtle little moments. And then you also get story on top of that, because then you get to create the background of the character or this creature that you're making, and you get to create the way that they look, in the art description. So it is really a full sort of service treatment when it comes to monster design as well. And I think one thing that we're very good at is when we know that there are interchangeable parts, we try to keep the designers sort of together. So if we know I'm doing an adventure and I know I need 3 different monsters in this adventure, sometimes I will also get to design those monsters because they're relevant to the adventure, and I would sort of know best what those monsters should look like and function as. And then a higher level designer will, vet it. And then we'll have our folks who are a bit more technical and, finessed at the creature stat creation, go over that. But really, it's this fun aspect. Like, I kind of like to have my hands in a lot of things. I feel like I would never be satisfied if I had to only do story or if I only had to do mechanics. So getting to do both is pretty fun for me.
Yeah, it's makes you well-rounded as well, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, that left-right brain just.
Yeah. With someone who has a long history with D&D like you do, was there anything that surprised you about coming to work at Wizards or coming to work on the brand? Anything that you were nervous about discovering? Like I used to be, I'm passionate about music. I'm not a musician. I just love music. And I used to, love going to see bands and like finding new artists and stuff. And I thought that's where my career would take me, was in the music industry. And I did work for record labels prior to coming to work for Wizards.
Oh, wow.
And it actually wasn't, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. It was kind of like, I see too much and I don't want to know. Like,
you know how the sausage is made.
I did not want to
enjoy breakfast again.
Yeah, it's like, I love these people too much. I can't do that. Hopefully you have not had experiences where you're like, God, no, this can't be. But was there anything, like that surprised you about working on a brand that you've been familiar with for many years?
I think in some ways I was lucky because this was my first sort of major AAA experience, like my most, FTE with benefits, like physical building, not just meeting in communal space kind of thing. And so I didn't really come in with too many expectations because I didn't really know what was going to happen. I will say I was surprised by how small the teams are.
Yeah.
Like when you think of like, these games, you're like, they've got, so much staff. And when they're teaching you what game design is like, when you're in school, they tell you about all the different roles and you have this and that, and you have a narrative designer and you have this. That is very dependent on the company. And our company, we definitely fold in some roles in some ways. So like the D&D team is quite small. I think people would be surprised by how small it is, with everybody being able to push out the level of product that we do. And even Magic side, they have a much larger team, but the actual like exploratory teams and the actual set design teams are smaller groups, like no more, I think, than 8, 10, and so I think what was both, was a little bit shocking, but I think was ultimately a good thing, is I didn't realize how much my voice would matter or could matter if I if I really wanted it to matter. Like there's a certain level of stick-to-itiveness you need to have, or doggedness or tenacity or whatever you want to call, like AKA obsession, that you need to get an idea through. But it was possible. And that's not always a guarantee. And I appreciated that about the company.
That's super cool, right? The idea that like if you're just, one out of 1,000 employees, you're not going to be able to make as much of a huge change, or it would be harder to do that. But if you're just 1 out of 8 or 10, you can push forward that idea and make it sure and be that champion the whole way through.
Yeah. And it may not come out the exact way that you had hoped. It may not be exactly what you thought it would be when you concepted it. But it is possible to get it out there. And I think that, having that, it provides room, I think, for products like Black is Magic. And I hope that we continue to have that room in our brands in the future.
I love all that. It's so good. All right. So I rolled a 9 this time on the die, but no lies detected. I think everything there is on the up and up.
Yeah, no, it takes too much brain space to think about lying while also opening my mouth and making the words sound good. So,
well, you've definitely given some insight to us and hopefully to listeners about what you've been doing, and I think it's all amazing, and I can't wait to see. You mentioned having some work in FizzBand's Treasury of Dragons, but I can't wait to see the tendrils of what you're doing in products to come.
Oh yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited, definitely excited for what's coming.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks,
You
Sydney.
too.
We'll let you get
Thank
back.
you so much for inviting me. This was fun.
This was
Awesome.
fun. Thank
All right.
you.